You're tuned to KSJE, Farmington, New Mexico, 90.9 FM. And now 103.3 FM, K277CR, Durango, Colorado.
We have a 911. Armed robbery in progress. See surplus store corner Peoples Drive on 24th Street.
Hi, welcome to Cop Shop. I'm Nicole Brown, the Public Information Officer for the Farmington Police Department, and I'm here with Chief Hebby, the one and only.
Good to see you again, Nicole.
I know you too. I feel like I haven't seen you in a while.
It has been a little while. I thought you weren't even going to remember who you were just a minute ago. but you ran.
I remembered.
And we're joined today with our guest, Sergeant Nick Bloomfield.
Hello.
How are you, Nick?
Chief.
Hi.
Well, it's good to be here with both of you.
And Nick works in our use of force division that we started here about a year and a half ago, and so we're going to wind up talking with Nick some about police use of force and how the Farmington Police Department has chosen to handle that over the last year and a half, a little different. But first we want to kind of catch you up. We've got a busy day and several things going on in the next few days, and Nicole's got a calendar item for
I
you.
do. We've got a whole bunch of stuff. So first this weekend, we have the annual FPD food drive, Christmas food drive. So we have our officers there at Albertsons off of East Main. They'll be there the 14th and the 15th, so Saturday and Sunday from 9 a.m. to 4:30. And please, you can, cash, check, food, whatever you would like to donate. We canned food, non-perishables, and that's all going to be delivered to different charities around town. And it's always something that we enjoy doing, and it goes to a good cause. So come on out and donate.
And through the years, we've helped quite a few families.
Mm-hmm.
Our officers take the food over, some to charities, but some directly to some families. I think that they get from some of the charities, and so it's always a good thing. Our officers enjoy doing it. Come on out and visit with them, and that's all this weekend.
Yep, this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, at Albertsons, 4909 East Main Street, over there by Chili's and Outback.
Yep,
So
good area. Stop over,
Yeah.
have lunch, and then swing by and buy some food for people.
yeah, and then of course, Guardians of the Good. The deadline for Guardians of the Good is coming up. So December 16th is the last day that you can submit a nomination. Got to get it in before 5 p.m. Scott is so wonderful and put up a picture of 3 of our chiefs that have joined us this year. Chief Moeller, he's with Bloomfield Fire and San Juan County Fire. Chief Karst with Bloomfield PD, and Chief Dougherty with San Juan County Fire, we just announced he's retiring at the end of this month.
I didn't even catch
So this
that.
is like his last good Guardians of the Good thing as a
This is
chief.
a good one to go out on then.
Yeah, we're excited. So, but if you would like to nominate someone, please get that nomination in before 5 p.m. on the 16th, Monday. And then, of course, if you want to donate, you can donate to San Juan Safe Communities, and they're at 100 West Broadway in Farmington.
We've had a number of donations,
we
including Realty Pros donated $1,000 last.
I know. It was
Earlier
awesome.
this week, I guess it was, which was just an outstanding, and we very much appreciated it. So if you want to help us reach more people, you can donate, but otherwise we're definitely taking nominations, and if you know people that are deserving, they're just hardworking people that could use a break. They don't get recognized very much. They always got a positive attitude. They're good for our community. Those are people that we're looking to reach out to. So.
Absolutely. And the last thing we have is the Warm Our Community initiative, and that's kind of a partnering thing with San Juan Safe Communities, San Juan Peer Support, and then the mental health group for San Juan County. And they're collecting backpacks, sleeping bags, either new or gently used. You can drop them off at San Juan Safe Communities, I believe also at District Court and Bloomfield Municipal Court. And they're going to be putting kits together and distributing them to officers all throughout the county, so that when they come to, across someone in need who's homeless or doesn't have shelter, they at least can give them a backpack with supplies and a sleeping bag and find them someplace warm to sleep and help them out. So.
Yes. Another good initiative. We have one more. That's the soonest of all, and that's at 1 o'clock today down at the Farmington Civic Center. We're having a San Juan Training Center graduation ceremony. Farmington Police Department has 5 recruits that are being sworn in today.
That's exciting.
If you've never attended one of those, they're worth attending to see, young people that are just joining us and have their whole career in front of them, still all bright and enthusiastic and nervous as they're getting ready to go into field training.
Yeah.
It's a good ceremony. So usually takes hour to 90 minutes tops. Stretch out your lunch a little bit, swing over to the Farmington Civic Center and see the latest in San Juan County law enforcement getting sworn in.
It's a great ceremony, and it is. They're all bright-eyed and excited, and it is cool.
Yeah. So we've got a busy slate of things for you to do, but today we also wanted to talk. We're kind of nearing year end, and one of the things that we do at the police department at year end is, we kind of review what we've been doing, and where we think things are going well, and where we think we can make some improvements. And a couple of years ago, now about a year and a half ago, we started a unit that's our use of force team. And our theory on it was we wanted to have every use of force that the Farmington Police Department gets into reviewed by this team. And by that, we want to see what we're doing. We want to see, if our training, if our policies, if our actions are what we're hoping they are. And one of the first groundbreaking people was Sergeant Bloomfield, was assigned to that unit. And so, Nick, why don't you talk a little bit about, how we came to develop this and some of the things that we've learned as we've gone along.
All right. Well, I think a couple of things. I think, primarily when, you hear about police use of force, Chief, I think that's, it conjures a lot of, very controversial, sentiments across the country, and especially post-Ferguson. And so I think it's valuable for, our listeners to kind of understand the history a little bit about, how did law enforcement arrive here, and, what are progressive law enforcement institutions doing, going forward to make sure that there's a good understanding, transparency, and trust when it comes to police use of force within the communities that they serve. But I think one of the questions that we need to ask, and talking about having new law enforcement officers graduate the academy and everything else, is what is actually the role of police in society? And that's that's a pretty broad question. And when you ask people that actually live in the community, if you ask police officers that question, you'll get a range of answers. But the best we can figure from looking at the Constitution and foundational policing principles, the best definition of what the role of law enforcement is the role of law enforcement is to accomplish law enforcement objectives without infringing on the rights of the populace. If you were to sum it all up, that's really the goal. Because obviously we have a variety, like I said, of law enforcement objectives that we need to do in serving our communities. But the balancing portion of that is that we need to make sure that all law enforcement objectives are done acting under the color of the Constitution and not infringing on the rights of the populace. So post-Ferguson, when Ferguson happened, there was a number of initiatives that took place, and a lot of conversations started across the country when it came to police use of force. And so looking at those events, and of course you, Chief, kind of being the head of the organization, wanted to talk about police use of force and say, is Farmington Police Department, are we doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that we're policing in a constitutionally sound manner? And so we start off by, consulting with individuals. We consulted with Attorney Eric Daigle, who's a expert in police use of force. He's been all over the country and has been well involved in a lot of these progressive movements going forward. So we start off by first looking at the policies and saying, okay, do the policies that govern the application of force within the Farmington Police Department, are those currently up to industry standard?
We started that
That was in 2016.
2016, pretty seriously. We had already been talking some, and you'd done some with how we use force against people that were in custody already. in handcuffs, or and unfortunately, Farmington Police Department comes in contact with inebriates fairly regularly, and so how we interact with those who are generally not criminals, but in need of police assistance, and so our officers are having contact, but sometimes we degenerate into force situations that we didn't want to. So we're already talking de-escalation and some means of controlling people in the least aggressive manner possible. But then we got more into the use of force policies in about 2016 with Eric.
That's correct. And really, if you look at use of force, this is a topic that we could spend hours discussing in the history behind it and how we arrived here. But generally speaking, it really is a balance. And what the courts are concerned about as far as the constitutional application of force is a number of factors. They're looking at basically the severity of the crime, number one. So absolutely we have, petty crimes, misdemeanors, all the way up to violent felony crimes. And the way the courts view this balance as to whether or not the force applied by police officers was constitutionally sound or constitutionally reasonable is based upon that factor. First of all, is what was the governmental interest when it came to dealing with this individual. So, for example, a person that commits a petty offense, maybe we have an individual who, does a petty shoplifting. How much interest does the government really have in holding this person accountable? It doesn't mean that we don't hold that person accountable, but if we end up using an extreme amount of force on that individual for a misdemeanor or petty misdemeanor crime, the question is
no crime at all. Like inebriates and some of the
absolutely,
go to.
Absolutely. The question is that proportional?
Right.
Now, if somebody's committed a violent felony, if you have a homicide suspect, then obviously the government has a higher level of interest in holding that person accountable and actually applying force. And so there's a lot of factors that are there. And also, as far as the officers go, what are the force options that we actually have? What are the outcomes that we're looking at? And one of the biggest things that's really come up, what you just mentioned, Chief, is that law enforcement objectives, when it comes to application of force, we don't always deal with people that have committed a crime. Like you said, when we're dealing with street inebriates, people that are dealing with mental illness, those are actually medical issues that we're, assisting and trying to get these people help. And so then the question comes in is if they haven't committed a crime, but there's still a law enforcement objective, because statutorily speaking, if we have a street inebriate who is not in a position to care for themselves due to their level of intoxication, inclement weather, things like that, the statutes do give us the authority to take those people and to transfer them to a facility to where, again, they can sober up and have those basic needs met. But if that person resists us during that, can the police use force? And
well, and that's been something. It's suicide calls and medic assist calls that the police have been going on for years. I mean, there's so much more that law enforcement is doing today that our officers are having contact with than just responding to see the man, burglary, 10th and Broadway. And so all of those situations can result in your officers in some sort of confrontation. And so how the department trains and how the department expects our officers to interact in those situations. Sometimes now we're backing away from some of these situations because there isn't a point in escalating something that from the start, it was just kind of a welfare check. So that's been some change in the industry over the last decade and a half.
It really has, especially, talking about suicidal subjects. It used to be, historically speaking, that anytime the police would get called to assist with a suicidal individual, we would immediately show up and we would see those situations through. Well, that's changed. And the reason why that's changed is because, again, we're talking about a situation where it's not a crime for a person to do harm to themselves. It's a crime for people to do harm to others. And so when you look at that, the question law enforcement has to ask is, do we have a lawful objective here? Right. And so the only time that we now are getting involved in situations that involve suicidal threats is when the actions of that individual who is exhibiting these suicidal tendencies is that affecting or jeopardizing the safety of other individuals. And if that's the case, then we will step in. So.
Yes.
It's all very interesting. But moving forward, the big three areas that we're trying to establish consistency with use of force is once we looked at our policies, got those updated through consultation and just kind of looking at best industry practices and what the courts have essentially stipulated. The three areas that need to be consistent when it comes to use of force is, of course, the policy, number one, the training, number two, and then supervision, number three. Because obviously the policy dictates what we do as an organization. The training is how we actually translate the policy into officers who are out there on the street practically applying these things. And that's the one thing is that, from the courts to to corrections to law enforcement, we're all practicing law on a daily basis. Yes. And so what is the practical application? And that's where the training comes in. And then the last thing is making sure that our supervisors are on board with the philosophy, that they understand what's in the policy, so that when it comes to accountability as an organization, they understand, okay, these are the parameters that we're operating in, this is the philosophy, and this is the end goal. And all that together has kind of brought us to, our latest progression in our efforts to make sure that we're policing in a constitutionally sound manner, which was the formation of our Force Investigation Unit. And so, like you said, about a year and a half ago, we looked at putting this together. And prior to that, what would happen is when our officers use force, and I'll speak to a little bit later if we have time about how we view force in different levels and how we categorize force. But what traditionally would happen is a police officer would use force in the course of their duties. A supervisor, their direct supervisor, after the force was done, all the reports were written, we would take all that information and they would conduct a review to determine whether or not that force was within policy. Well, on patrol alone, you can have, anywhere from 6 to 9 patrol supervisors that may be reviewing force. And while we do have a policy that kind of dictates, again, what's within policy and what's outside policy, there's a lot of subjectivity that can come into a force review. And so among all those individuals, what we wanted to do is we wanted to say, okay, can we get one place where this can come together, where we can have more consistency, more objectivity when it comes to reviewing force and get a better understanding of what's actually going on within the agency as a whole.
And so, just a fact of life in policing is we're going to wind up using force. Officers use force. And in no way are our policies preventing our officers from using force or over-justifying it. It's like you said, we know that we're going to wind up in some of these situations. So we want to have good guidance for our officers on what we want them to do, what the parameters are. Then we want to train them. Then we want to review what we're doing to make sure that we're consistent with that. So our officers do use force, unfortunately, in the course of our job. It's about the only way you can accomplish the goal of keeping your officers safe is to give them the ability to defend themselves when they have to, and also to apprehend people that desperately need to be apprehended. And like you said, a homicide suspect or someone like that is somebody we've got to get that arrest. That's the job of the police. But some of the other lower level ones, we really are reviewing how we're using force and whether we really need to. And we're probably we've backed off over the last decade. Some of that with government, the DOJ's encouragement as they've watched what's gone on across the country, and including Albuquerque. But this later iteration was our effort to, okay, we know we're seeing force, but are we consistently investigating it? Are we consistently telling our officers what our expectations are? And I think that was probably one of the best parts of this unit, which I don't know that I saw as much as it's turned out. Is we really are being more consistent now. We've developed through you and Lieutenant Postlethwaite some forms that are standardized that every officer fills out under these situations, and our review of all the body cam footage, and we have a new body cam system that's on. It really has allowed us to take a real critical look at every use of force that we're getting into.
Absolutely, and one of the other problems is it's hard to do a thorough review when you don't have adequate time to do so. And, when the line level supervisors were doing the review, well, they have a lot of other responsibilities that they're taking care of. And so, again, it's one of those things where they just don't have adequate time sometimes to really dig into these things and say, are there any patterns that we're seeing, good or bad? Are there improvements that can be made, and addressing some of those concerns? And so by, again, sending it essentially to one place where we can do that, and we have the time if there's a situation that we're reviewing and we feel that, we want to involve some more individuals in the conversation, and take an opportunity to kind of look at these things more closely, then we're better able to do that. And
So, Nicole, we're on Facebook Live right now, and Nicole, we've got some comments, it looks like, that have come up?
Someone asked to repeat the name of the law group that we consulted with. So I replied to that. It was Eric Daigle of Daigle Law Group. And then just a lot of people waving and telling us hi and enjoying it, and saying thank you. We do have one comment. I hope he's talking about Guardians of the Good. He said he has a $100 bill to donate at Webb Toyota if someone swings by to get it.
Wow, very good.
But no questions about force. Just the question about what law group we were working with.
Generally, we don't just swing by to pick up money from people, except when we're soliciting it for these charities.
Right,
Like,
yeah, it's going to go straight to...
that's a whole different unit that reviews when we do things like that.
That's right.
So Nick, you've been in there for a year and a half, and what's been your assessment of it? You were a cop for maybe a decade before we started this unit, and how do you think this is going? And
I think it's excellent. I think it's very progressive. Again, talking to our consultant Eric Daigle, one of our officers, visited with him and told him what we were doing, because a lot of bigger agencies and those who have been obligated by the Department of Justice to implement these units have done so. But he says, I do not know of an agency our size in the country that has a force investigation unit to the level that we do. And so I think it speaks a lot to where we're at in our philosophy and what we're trying to do. And overall, it's been excellent because it's given us a broader sense. When I was a patrol supervisor, I only got to see what my guys were doing, my 6 to 8 guys that I was responsible for. Well, with 100 and, nearly 40-man agency, we're able to see everything. And so it gives us a better understanding of what we're good at, on a macro level. Sometimes, you have individual officers where there's individual things that we need to address there. But so we're able to narrow in if we need to address something individually, but then we're also able to address through training and updates and things like that, larger patterns that we're seeing.
So we're using force about 150 to 160 times over the last couple of years, I think is roughly the number it's roughed out at. But most of those forces are very minor forces, a sleeve guide, where we're taking somebody and maybe there's a struggle, but it's not a lot of force that's being used. That's the overwhelming majority of the things we use. But it does go up, and we have different levels of force that engender different reactions from us as an agency.
Yes, that's correct. We divide our force up into different levels. Level 1 is going to be minor applications of force, all the way up to level 2s are primarily when we use our tools, OC spray, tasers, batons, K9s, things like that. And then level 3 is any application of force that is likely or did cause great bodily harm, great bodily injury, and or death. But the majority are the level 1s.
So we're nearing the end. We'll actually bring Nick back for another discussion on it, a little more in depth here as we start the new year. But I think it's important that our public knows that we review the force that we do use, and that we're trying to do the best we can to minimize those. As far as today goes, we'll get hold of the guy with $100.
Yeah.
And anybody that wants to come out for our law enforcement academy graduation, we're racing over there pretty quick right now.
We are straight there.
So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Is that into the new year already?
Well, I think we're going to do a best of for our next one. Over the holidays, we'll take a little bit of a break. You guys can see
the next live one will be in 2020.
It will.
Thank you.